This is a recording of the KC Secular AA speaker meeting held every Saturday night at HJ's Youth and Community Center, 6425 Warnell Road, Kansas City, Missouri.
Welcome to Secular Speaker Meeting. I'm Simon. I'm an alcoholic.
Hi, Simon.
Ask Chris to read the preamble.
Chris, alcoholic.
Hi, Chris.
AA is a fellowship of people who share their experience, strength, and hope with each other that they may solve their common problem and help others to recover. We have no dues or fees for membership. We are self-supporting through our own contributions. AA is not allied with any sect, denomination, politics, organization, or institution, does not wish to engage in any controversy, neither endorses nor opposes any causes. Our primary purpose is to stay sober and help others to achieve sobriety.
Good. Our secular group attempts to maintain a tradition of free expression and to conduct a meeting where all may feel free to express any doubts or disbeliefs they have and to share their own personal form of spiritual experience, their search for it, or their rejection of it. In keeping with AA tradition, we do not endorse or oppose any form of religion or atheism. Our only wish is to help those who want recovery without having to accept anyone else's beliefs or to deny their own. During the meeting, we'll pass around a basket. If you have some money to chip in towards rent and coffee and website and stuff, it's appreciated. Is there anybody who is new to the group who would like to introduce themselves? You don't have to.
I'm Chris, I'm an alcoholic.
Hey,
This is my
Chris.
first time here.
Thank you.
Welcome.
I'm Sabrina, I'm an alcoholic.
It's
This is my first time here.
I'm Sandra. I'm an addict with my first time in this group.
Hey, son.
My name's Mel. I'm an alcoholic first time in this group.
Mel?
Hey, Mel.
We also,
And I'm BJ, I'm not home.
hey BJ.
Hey, BJ.
Welcome.
We recognize extended periods of sobriety. Is anybody celebrating or recognizing any number of days or months?
Last week was 9 months for me.
Oh.
We do not have any coins, so you're gonna have to find somebody. Congratulations, though.
You guys go Sunday?
Oh, yeah.
Yes.
Years? All right. We begin the meeting with a 20 to 30 minute speaker. And they share how their life has been affected by sobriety. And then we take the remainder of the hour and discuss amongst the group. No one is obligated to share if they don't feel comfortable, but we do ask that you limit your time to allow others to respond or refrain from sharing more than once. After the meeting, we usually hang around and chat, feel like extending the conversation or have further questions. Some of us will introduce ourselves as alcoholics, but please feel free to introduce yourselves however you feel comfortable. And this is also an open meeting, so friends and family are invited to attend, or anybody else you'd like to bring along. And we record these meetings and put it on our website for others to listen to in podcast format. Now, speaker has come on in. Speaker's willing, we put that on the website, and then again, if the audience is willing, we put that on the website as well, as we'd like to share the discussion. If there's anybody who does not feel comfortable with that, you can see John after the meeting, and we will remove any segments with you in it if you still feel like sharing. And if this is kind of new, so if anybody just feels totally uncomfortable with the concept completely, let me know. I guess this would be the time to.
We could, if
Say
we needed
something.
to, we could turn the audience part off if we
Yeah.
actually needed to.
We're flexible, so I'm gonna go ahead.
I think the two latecomers probably first time too.
Oh yeah. Would you like to introduce yourselves? We've kind of done that, but
I'm
You don't have
Chris.
to.
I'm an alcoholic. I'm from Grant Street.
I remember that now.
I'm Dee, I'm an alcoholic. And yeah, I'm from 80th Street. I've been to Free Thinkers meeting before. I recognize a few of you guys. So,
Good to see you.
welcome.
All right, I'm very happy to introduce Bill. I guess I'll let you do the rest.
My name is Bill and I'm an alcoholic. What it was like, what happened, and what it's like now, I don't know whether I can wrap that up in 15 or 20 minutes or not. My sobriety date is September the 28th, 1967. So I'm working on my 52nd year. Been around for a while. It's a long time between drinks. I came to Kansas City, gosh, it must be almost 30 years ago. Kevin, how long have you been here?
27. I've been in the program 27 years.
Okay, so somewhere around 27 years ago I came, because Kevin was just getting sober when I got here. At any rate, I started to I think I had my first drink in a public bar when I was 14. And I had a lot of fun in the early days. I have friends who were in trouble from the time they took their first drink, and that wasn't true for me. I had a lot of fun. It was, just drinking after parties and after dances through the high school years. And the college years, I went to a very upstanding Christian college. If they caught you drinking, even if you were off campus, you were expelled immediately. And so I didn't have the usual college experience as far as drinking was concerned either. But as soon as the college years were over and I was free to do what I wanted, the drinking went out of control very quickly. Like I said, I had some fun. Even in the early days of the heavy drinking, I had some fun with it. But the time came when it was the most important thing in my life. If they weren't serving liquor, if it wasn't in a bar, I wasn't going there. Again, there weren't any particular problems. I had grown up with the feeling of being different. And I've heard this hundreds of times from other people in the program, and I'm not quite so sure how I thought I knew what other people felt like, but I felt like I felt differently than other people. They would seem to enjoy each other, they'd laugh and have a lot of camaraderie, and I would go through the motions. You couldn't tell from the outside looking at me, but I felt differently. I never felt that close or that relaxed with people, and the alcohol made it possible to do that, to unwind. The first couple drinks were kind of like somebody who hasn't had a cigarette for a long time that's addicted. That first drag, you just feel, and alcohol was like that for me. The problem was that it continually took more and more and more to get that feeling until it turned on me, and I didn't drink anymore for the relaxation and for the pleasure. I drank because I had to, and that went on for a few years. And when I realized that it was starting to get me in trouble, I decided that it was time to give it up and to quit drinking. And I'd go on the wagon. It would never last more than 3 or 4 days. And I'm pretty sure at the time, because I can remember lying to people, I'd tell them that I had been sober for a week or 2 weeks, and it was never true. So I could stay sober for a few days. And as soon as I started to feel good, I would think, oh, one couldn't hurt me, And I'd take that one and I would feel it all over my body, that same feeling that I described a second or two ago, just. And once I had that, then if one felt good, 2 would feel better, and 3 would be just great, and 1 for the road, and 1 for the ditch, and all of a sudden it's off to the races and I'm falling down drunk again. And the only time my hands stopped shaking was when I had a couple drinks in me. When I couldn't quit, eventually I got to the point where I quit quitting, and I decided to drink myself to death. And it was literal. I'm not talking about a subconscious death, which I knew what I was doing. I deliberately tried to drink myself to death. I thought it would kill fear. I had used it all my life to kill fear. And I thought eventually it will kill me too. And so I gave it a try. What I didn't count on was that it's not the easiest way in the whole world for a young man to die. Like I said, don't let the white hair and the beard fool you. I've been around here for a long time, so I was still comparatively young. And like I said, it's not the easiest way for a young man to die. Pain up and down my spine and in my legs, and burning sensations about the size of a quarter, $half in my back and the muscles in my back. I would throw things back up again. Sometimes I would have to have a couple drinks in the morning just to hold anything down on my stomach. And I'm all familiar with projectile vomiting. I could turn my head and hit that wall real easy. No problem at all. Except eventually things would start coming up yellow-green, because I wasn't eating anything anymore except the kind of things that you can buy at a bar. Salmon Sharpies, hard-boiled eggs, deviled eggs, pickled eggs. And that was my diet. Whatever I could drink at a bar or eat at a bar, that's what I ate. And even when there wasn't anything yellow-green to throw up anymore, my system didn't seem to know that there was nothing down there. And I would keep trying to heave things up, and I would go through a period of dry heaves. I learned how to drink water just so I would have something to throw back up again. I learned how to put Abdec in it because it's the vitamins that they give to babies that have colic. I don't know whether it helped any or not, but I tried it. I learned how to drink warm water rather than cold water because it's nicer to throw up warm water than it is to throw up water that's still cold. So I learned a lot during those years that I tried to quit drinking, and then, like I said, eventually just gave up and quit quitting. When I couldn't kill myself that way, when I found out how difficult that was, I went back to the trying to get sober again, and I would lock myself up in little places, and I'd sweat it out for 4 or 5 days, and I would eventually get hungry and go out to get something to eat. And like I said, you don't eat anywhere except in a restaurant that has a bar, or you go into a bar that you know has kind of the food that I've already described. I don't know exactly how long I tried that, but 4 or 5 times at least I would lock myself up into this little hotel, whatever you want to call it. Actually, what it was a shack, and there was a single light bulb hanging down in the middle of the room, and the floors were concrete, and they kind of sloped to a drain in the middle. And like I said, I would spend 4 or 5 days in that place. And the only entertainment, they didn't have TVs or anything like that. They would rent that shack to me for a couple $. And my entertainment for a lot of that time, the place was kind of just inundated with silverfish. And they would get behind the radiators where it was warm. And I had a can of lighter fluid, and I would squirt lighter fluid underneath and they would scurry across the floor, and I would light them and watch the flaming silverfish scurrying across the floor. It was great entertainment. It was a lot of fun. I had just come out of one of those when I coincidentally, whatever you want to call it, met the man who was to become my sponsor. I had been teaching the last years of my drinking, and my teaching salary, I walked out on my teaching job 6 weeks before the school year was over, and the salary from the teaching was toward the end of the summer, and my salary would be gone soon. The prorated part of the salary would end, and I needed an income, so I thought I could make a living in real estate. The family owned a small construction company, and I thought maybe I could make a living off their name. So I applied for a license, and eventually I needed an ID picture, and the photographer was the man who became my sponsor. I walked in to have my picture taken. He had known me since I was 13, 14 years old, and he just took one look at me and he said, "You look like hell. What's wrong with you?" And I said, I was beyond lying. I was a sponsor's dream. There was no denial at all. I just said, "John, I drink too much, and I can't stop." And he said, "Get your coat." And we ended up in a 5-day detox center. And at that time period in the history, I was lucky enough to have that detox center almost in my backyard. And there weren't many places like that anywhere in the country. I'm not sure that there were any at all of those short-term detox centers. You couldn't get an alcoholic into a hospital in those days. A lot of the hospitals, you'd take them to an emergency ward and they'd say, "Get him out of here. He's not sick, he's drunk." So I was lucky to have that. And I never went through that detox as a patient. But they had coffee rooms maybe about the size of this room, maybe a little bit bigger. And they had 3 or 4 maplewood tables. And I would sit at those tables every day and listen to the people who came in to work with the patients that were in there for treatment. And I would just sit there and listen to them. I never talked to anybody, because if I talked to anybody, I would start to shake again. And I didn't want to go through that anymore. So I just was quiet. I just sat there and listened. Eventually, I started to follow my sponsor and his buddies around. They did a lot of service work. And again, I never said anything. I would just go with them. Court groups, hospital groups, jail groups, and I just tagged along. I lost my temper in a court group one night, and the words just kept tumbling out. And when they found out I could talk from then on for the next year or so, I spent on a speaker circuit for the tri-state area, and the tri-state area for me at that time was West Virginia, Pennsylvania, and Ohio. And I had a lot of fun. Be nervous for the first couple of minutes, and then I would just kind of relax and enjoy. And I enjoyed the years that I spent on the circuit. I can remember doing one to a group that was very much like the Ward Parkway group. A lot of affluent people. I looked at the front row of that little meeting one night, and there must have been a couple $100 million of assets sitting across the front row. I won't mention the names because they're nationally known. But there was a woman who sat kind of the center there and maybe a row or two back, and she just sat there and she stared at me with her mouth hanging open. And I said, "Franny, what's wrong?" And I stopped right in the middle of my talk. And she said, "I didn't know you could talk. I thought you were permanently brain damaged." So that's how quiet I was. I never talked to anybody ever unless I absolutely had to. And she thought I had just burned too many brain cells out. At the end of the first year, the temptation to take a drink during those initial months was tremendous because I knew one drink and I would start to feel better. And my withdrawals were horrible. They went on and on and on. I didn't have the legal troubles. I didn't have the DUIs, DWIs that a lot of people have. There's no jail time, no prison time. I didn't have any serious financial problems. I walked out on a marriage, but it wasn't very much of a marriage to begin with, so that wasn't a big loss either. She was perfectly willing for the marriage to go on as long as I would start drinking with her again, to give you an idea of where I was with all of that. And it just got to be an impossible situation. So at the end of the first year, I had gone to a lecture at Pitt on alcoholism, and as we walked up the stairs, somebody introduced the woman that was walking next to me, and by the time we got to the top, she was a great deal older than I was, but we just really, really hit it off. And she controlled all of the money for rehabilitation in the state of Pennsylvania. So by the time we got to the top of the lecture room, I could have gone to work in any one of several hospitals, and I chose the one her brother was chief of staff on. So I worked in the field, and I doubled my teaching salary by the time I took that job. And I thought that was pretty neat. If I told you what those salaries were today, it would be laughable, but at the time, it was kind of affluent. $10,000 50 some years ago was a lot of money. So like I said, I had doubled my teaching salary. I think my last teaching salary was $4,800 for the year. It was a country school. They weren't paying very well. But at any rate, I felt guilty about taking that paycheck when I knew that anybody who had been sober for more than a year knew more about alcoholism and recovery than I did. So I did, what seemed right. I quit, and I got my replacement before I quit, and she was a nurse and took the job. And I went to Atlanta, Georgia, and worked with the convicts coming out of the prisons. And all the guys that were in prison because of something they did while they were either stoned or drunk, and fell in love with the program. So I just gave up my job with the hospital and moved down to Atlanta. It was interesting. The lieutenant governor was on the board of directors, and the whole thing was phony. They had faked their statistics, and they were doing it just for the influence that it gave them. When I found that out, I quit that job and moved back up to Pennsylvania and asked if they could find a job for me again, and I still had all the contacts from being there before. So they got me a job, all right, a farm on the West Virginia-Pennsylvania line, and a place when I walked in, it was a wreck. And the guys that were in there, it was all men at that point, and the guys that were in there were afraid they would never get anything to eat on a regular schedule. And they had hidden food behind the books in the library and things. So there was molding, desiccated food. Almost every corner you looked, they had hidden food. And so got that place cleaned up. Again, it was an interesting experience. I enjoyed the time on the farm. Somewhere along the line, I turned china yellow. My eyeballs, my fingernails, my belly. And the diagnosis was cancer of the liver. The pre-diagnosis, and eventually I was out of the hospital in 10 days. They decided that they had made a mistake and that it was really hepatitis. And I was still doing the rehab from that. Went back to the farm for just a little while. Somewhere in the process of that, the hepatitis and making contacts with the farm, I had filled out an application for a grant to spend a year at Johns Hopkins and study alcoholism. And it was a combined program with Hopkins in the city of Baltimore. And I don't think I would have ever had the nerve to ask for it if I had, but I thought I was dying. I thought was diagnosed as cancer of the liver. I thought I won't be here long. What the hell difference does it make? So I made that application and I got the grant. So I spent an academic year with that program, and again, it was a lot of fun. I don't have many triggers as far as drinking is concerned. I wanted to be sober almost from actually from the first meeting. I fell in love with the program. I wanted to be sober. I wanted a different way of life, and the program offered that to me, and that was fine with me. And I was what you ask every newcomer to do. I was willing to do anything to get that sobriety. It didn't matter. I would turn it all over. And when I took the second and third step, the second step for me was hope. It was the hope that I could be the way I saw the rest of you, and that I could begin to live a sober life and that it would last. The third step I took quite literally. And part of it was because I'm lazy. I thought if I can just turn all my problems over to a higher power, then I don't have to worry about anything anymore. Well, I was right about the I don't have to worry about anything anymore. But it took me a while to get on, and when I said that I was open-minded and willing to do anything, there were reservations. Anything that, when I went through the 12 steps, anything that said God or had a capital H for he or him in it, they weren't fooling me with that capital he or him bit. I knew what they were talking about, and I didn't want any part of that. The hair on my arms and the back of my neck would actually stand up. I didn't want anything to do with it, anything that sounded like Christianity or any other religion for that matter. I grew up in a household with a Lutheran father, a Christian Science mother, an Irish Catholic grandmother. She would take me to Mass to make my father mad. And they fought for years, so I got a lot of Mass out of the thing too. I was an alderman in a Methodist youth group. I sang in an Episcopal boys choir. I graduated from a Presbyterian college. I arrived at AA a very devout atheist. And even that is more joke than anything else. I don't know that I was ever an atheist. I was sure an agnostic. Yeah, little by little, I think I've qualified enough to give you an idea of where I was and what things were like, and what happened for that matter. Like, I just never knew I was having my last drink. I didn't know that I was on my way to an AA meeting when I walked into that photographer's shop that day. And John stayed my sponsor for years and years. And in a lot of ways, he still is. He was kind of tall, very slender. His eyes were set back and his head about that far. He had a huge, big nose. He was not a good-looking man. And he was loud. He was vulgar. He yelled a lot. And I think he tried to scare people to keep them at a distance because he had a great heart and he would do anything in the world for you. And I was lucky enough to have him for quite a few years. And like I said, I can still hear him in my head. And so he's still my sponsor in a lot of ways. I've chosen other sponsors along the way, but I don't know. It never seemed that important to me. I worked my way through the steps, and I've already told you that was a problem. If it had a capital He or a capital H for him, the word God, even the phrase higher power, was kind of a turnoff for me. Again, I knew what they were talking about. They weren't fooling me with that higher power shit. After I'd been sober for a while, and worked my way through those programs, I ended up back in my own hometown. My sister was diagnosed with cancer, and she wasn't as lucky as I was. And when she was in the last months of her life, I went home to be with my mother and dad. I gave up that farm in southern Pennsylvania and just went home. And one of the guys from the farm went home with me, and we worked for the family construction company. She, in a lot of ways, was my best friend, so I was not just losing a sister, I was losing my best friend. And it was really rough on me. I would go to work during the day, and at night I'd get in a pair of pajamas and sit in front of a TV set, and I never went anywhere. I just was back to those days when I didn't want to see anybody at all. I was never a lone drinker, so I wasn't drinking during that time, or at least I wasn't, even concerned about drinking. I just sat there and used whatever excuse I could think of to not go anywhere, not do anything. Somebody called me and they said, as long as you're here and you have all the education that you have as far as rehab is concerned, would you counsel one boy in a program that they had? And I said, yeah, I'll counsel one boy. And 2 weeks later, I was director of their program. They had had a Roman Catholic priest who they didn't realize that he was drinking right there in the rehab center. When we opened his closet, the top shelf on it was all the empty bottles were stashed away in the closet. He told somebody at one point that his life's ambition was to see my hide stuffed over his mantle. We were good friends at one time. Yeah, I took and spent some time with that program. So, I never got along very well with boards of directors, so I stole their program out from underneath their board of directors. And the Catholic Church, like I said, I'm a Protestant puppy basically, but the Catholic Church was very good to me. They gave me an old nursing home. It was a huge outfit. We probably could have easily slept 30, 40 people in that complex. They had built a dormitory over, at one point, what had been a family swimming pool. In the old mansion, the church gave us the whole thing, and all we had to do was pay the bills to keep it from freezing. And that was a problem with a building that big and that old. Our heating bills were $450, $500 a month. But it was fun again. I enjoyed all the service work. I enjoyed all the places that I worked for and all those rehab centers that I worked in. But I still had that problem. I was beginning to realize that there was probably more to the spiritual end of the program than I had been willing to admit in the beginning. I began to think differently about the steps. And in the beginning, I had just kind of briefed over them and not worried too much about it. And my sponsor let me get away with that. He never worried about my working steps. For me, the program was pretty much the camaraderie and the friendships. And it took me a long time. And when I say a long time, I'm talking about a few months, because now people talk about a long time before they start really working the steps, and they're talking about 2 or 3 years. There's no way that I could have managed that. I probably would have been drunk if I had waited that long. So eventually I did start working. What I found was that as I began to work the steps, I began to see more and more sense to them. It wasn't just a matter of the alcoholism. Maybe the primary purpose of the program is recovery from alcoholism. But the ultimate program is to get you into a spiritual life, whatever that means to you. And for me, I could begin to see that if I worked the steps the way they were meant, the first nine steps, it robbed the ego of its defects and its character flaws. And as that happened, the chaos in my life began to reduce. And as the chaos began to reduce, the conscious contact began to improve. And it got to the point where there was a lot of intuitive knowledge, where answers to my problem would just suddenly be there in my mind. There was no thought leading up to it. There was no linear thought leading to the conclusions. The information was just there. And that was startling for me, for someone who had never believed in things like that. And all of a sudden to have it start to happen. And the feeling that went along with it was great. And that speaker circuit that I had talked about, I would start to talk, and for the first few minutes, I would be nervous and shaky, and all of a sudden this other thing, this intuition would just flood into my mind, and what I wanted to say next, and the stories would just fill my mind as I talked, and my voice, my vocabulary, but I would become part of the group just like anyone else. Because what I was really listening to was that intuitive knowledge pouring into my consciousness. And that went on. I could depend on it. It would happen almost every time I spoke to a group. Somewhere after the first few minutes, that would kick in. And I think the groups could feel it as well as I did. You could tell the change in their attention. And every once in a while, I would wait for it to kick in so that I could join the group and just listen with everybody else. And it wouldn't happen. When it happened, I felt good. The feeling that went along with it was just fantastic. When it didn't happen, I thought, oh, shit, I don't ever want to do this again. I don't ever want to make another talk, another speech in my whole life. And eventually I'd get conned into doing another one, and it would be all right again. But I hated those times where I was banking on it happening and it didn't happen. And it was just me standing up there in front of a microphone wondering, what do I say next? Like tonight, No, you've been great, and I think we must be running close to time. But at any rate, that's where I was, and pretty much where I am now. I do a meditation group here over in I guess it's still Overland Park. It's just off of 75th to 7400 block on Neiman. And I guess we're giving that up too. We lost that room too. So the New City Church has offered us a new one, but I haven't seen it yet. And so maybe for a week or so it's going to be without that meditation meeting, and I will miss that. I've enjoyed doing it. Okay, I thank you all very much for your time and your attention, and I think whatever Simon wants to do.
So at this point, if anybody has any insights or things they'd like to get off their chest and talk about, or things they'd like to bring up to the group or with Bill, have at it.
Bill, I have a question for you. What would you say, if anything, was different about the AA meetings when you were starting out in the 60s and 70s compared to today?
Well, in the late 60s and early 70s, the average age in AA was 55. And I would walk into those rooms and I would see gray hair and pot bellies, and I would think, God, by the time I'm as old as these guys, I'll have a quarter of a century sober. So that's changed. I go to a late night group now, and what people used to refer to as 80th Street, Northeast Johnson County. And I think a week or so ago there was a little girl there, and she was 15 and she'd been sober for a couple of years. So, that has changed drastically over the years. When I came in, I was 31 years old, and I looked young enough that I was being barred out. If I would go into a bar, they wouldn't let me in. They thought that I was too young. I can remember telling one doorman, I said, next time I come, I'll come with a couple grandchildren. And he believed me and let me in. And the only reason I was there was to listen to some cousins to play in the band. But at any rate, that's changed drastically. There were probably not anywhere near as many women in the program as there are now. At 31, there were only a couple people in that whole tri-state area that were in the program. There were no young people. There were very, very few people, even in their 30s. When we talked about young people's meeting, we meant anybody under 40. I'm serious. But the increase in the number of women and the young people, that's all very different. And I've used words tonight that I would have never used in those pioneering days. Shit, the F-bomb, things like that just weren't accepted. I joke about nuts and bolts and that meaning, that they have to dress certain ways at certain time during the week. And I joke about it, but when I think about the pioneer days, that's the way it was. Mm-hmm. We would never have come to a meeting like this without a tie and jacket on. Mm-hmm. You just didn't talk to a group unless you had a jacket and a tie on. So that's all changed. The vocabulary has changed, like I said, to use vulgarities. You just didn't do that. Ann Ann was mentioned in the first history of AA. She was one of the first women who stayed sober. And Annie and I were buddies. She would have had an attack if anybody had used the F-bomb in front of her. She just played the little schoolgirl bit. She would kind of crouch down in her seat and her face would blush. She was very fond of a little Irishman called the Fighting Irish Kid, and Jimmy would talk any way he wanted to talk. And she loved him, so she'd let him get away with it. But like I said, things like that just were not generally accepted.
My name's Kevin. I'm an alcoholic.
Hey, Kevin.
Yeah, it was 28 years. I cheated myself out of a year. That you showed up down at when I was attending Unity, and you had a sponsee with you, and you had come in from California at that time, correct? Yeah, all right. And it was you were a big part of my early recovery, and the liberalness that I found at the meeting down at Unity at that time was very liberal, and you were a big part of that because I think you brought some California AA with you, and you were never my official sponsor, but you certainly were a group of people that I considered my sponsors. So I always believed you could have as many sponsors as you needed, and you were certainly a big member of that, and I appreciate all the help that you gave to me, and I'm sure you could share some stories with some people about what a delight I was. Early in sobriety, after drinking Jag like you talked about. But thank you, and I love you, and it's so good to see you tonight. I appreciate you talking and doing what you do.
Thank you, Kevin.
Thanks, Kevin.
Thanks, Kevin.
Yeah, when I first met Kevin, my hair was almost down to my belt line, and it was blonde red. And I kept it that way. I found something that I could, in the showers, I found this out during the trucking days. I could rinse it in while I was taking a shower, and it would only tint the gray hair. It didn't change the effect of it all over. But as I got grayer and grayer, it got harder and harder to do. And I noticed one day somebody staring at me, and I thought the sunlight is coming through the windows and hitting my face, and where the sunlight hit, my beard was pink. It was about the end of the blonde red hair. I turned white overnight. I shaved it all off, and I was all white underneath. So, but Kevin and I had a lot of fun.
Yes, we did.
Remember Unity when it was, gosh, the noon meeting was pretty good. The rest of the meetings, there were only a handful of us, believe it or not. Now they're lucky if they can fit into 2 rooms. But it was fun. It really was. And I'm as indebted to Kevin as he says he is to me. You were a lot of the making it fun and making it a decent place to be. I can remember that room when it was blue carpeted with a great big brown stain out in front of one area where somebody had either or spilled a lot of coffee. It looked like there was a big oil stain out in the middle of the room. We had a heck of a time keeping those meetings going and getting the 6 o'clocks to go, and nobody at that point had even thought about an 8 o'clock or anything like that. Now it's thriving business.
My name's Lee. I'm an alcoholic. In some of the discussions that we've had over the last year or so that I've been connected to the secular sector, some of us have felt that there is an increasingly encroaching fundamentalist tone to the AA movement, at least in this region, and I can't speak to the West Coast or the East Coast because I'm here. And I wondered if that was also your observation as to that trend, and if so, what do you think of that trend?
I call myself a Christian mystic. Christian because I'm in the Bible Belt, and it just makes it easier to get along with people if you tag that Christian. But if you're a mystic, it doesn't matter anymore whether it's Buddhism, Hinduism, Taoism. It just pretty much all blends together. But with all of that, with all of the mysticism, and I do consider myself a mystic, the Christian part of it doesn't matter to me anymore. But I believe it or not, I agree with you. I would rather see AA free and clear of all of that tendency to go back to a fundamental Christian or any other religion for that matter. I just don't think this is the place for it. But I guess it's going to be very hard in all the years now. It's hard for me to close a group and not think immediately of having a prayer at the end of the group. It just has become so natural. But I really do agree with you that the meetings, the program is not the place for any of that. I really don't know what else to say except for me, for my own personal. Now I could probably bore you for another 15 minutes or so with mystical experiences that I've gone through. You know, it certainly has changed my life, and that I've survived a number of different physical problems. I used to wonder if I can go into a meditation and heal my body, and I was very good at that. Why do I even get sick at all? And on the other hand, I'm sitting here with one lung, the other one I lost to cancer. I've been through chemotherapy and gone toxic, and I've lost most of the muscle in my body. I usually, even if it was 90 degrees, I would wear long sleeves to cover up the creeping skin underneath. I tried sitting in one of your chairs tonight, and I decided at least there's a little bit of padding in this thing, because the muscle and the I have no butt is what I that went to the chemotherapy. So I also have one of those at home. I don't know whether you've got a condenser, but I have a miniature condenser only about that size. I almost never wear it, but I have it in a closet at home somewhere. And I sleep with the condenser at night because it's just safer with just having one lung. Yeah, and I have stenosis at the lower lumbar of the spine, the nerve centers where the nerves come out of the spine. It's starting to build bony structures in those canals, and I just made arrangements last to allow them to do surgery on. And surgery, when you're in your 80s, is dangerous. It's not a particularly rough kind of surgery. They'll take the front off of the discs and give the nerves more room to grow. And I understand they'll actually trace the channels and scrape the bone structure out of those nerve channels. The whole thing, only they tell me, only takes a half hour. It sounds like a lot of work to do in a half hour. But at any rate, I think I would rather run the risks. And I'm aware of the risks of surgery for elderly people. But I'm gonna give it a try anyway. I would rather have the last few years without all the pain and the struggle of moving than to not be able to do that. Like I said, I'm not good about that. I can climb a double flight of stairs. I'm a little, by the time I get to the top. But 80th Street, had those very steep, narrow stairs going up. But it was nice for me because I could reach the banisters on both sides and I could pull myself up the stairs. Anyway.
Can I have a second question?
Sure.
Okay, so you told me that you got sober not far from Dr. Bob's house, and that there were a lot of people that were in the program at that time that were, pioneers that were there in the beginning. Is there anything that you learned from those people? Any stories that we might not know about today?
Oh, I don't think so. Like I said, Ann's not God. The first history of AA talked about her as Ann C. And they all called her Bob's girl because she knew Bob when she was a teenager, before Bob got sober, for that matter. And Annie and I were great buddies. And the only thing that I can tell you, and I think almost everybody in the program by this time knows, that there were certain areas of Bill's life that he out and out lied about.
Okay.
He stood in front of thousands of people and said that how grateful he was that he had never had an extramarital affair. He had a mistress. And everybody, well, not everybody knew it, but I sure knew it. And Annie was friends with both Bill and Lois. And I think she was closer to Lois than she was to Bill, probably for that reason. And I've never understood why he made those speeches. Why did he bring it up at all? Nobody was asking him. And all of a sudden he's talking about not having extramarital affairs. And the only thing that I can guess at was that it was his attempt to protect Lois. Divorce, separation, marital problems in those days, people felt differently. That was kind of almost a sin. And I think if that's the only reason I can think of, because like I said, nobody was asking questions. He was volunteering that in an open speech in front of thousands of people.
Thank you.
Sure.
I'm Greg, I'm an alcoholic.
Greg.
Yeah, this is new. The hardest part is my husband and I were put on these in the same week. So we were tying each other constantly. One big knot in the middle. Otherwise, this all seems pretty good. I really appreciate your being here and telling your stories. And I certainly remember going through some of the, and it hasn't been that long ago, going through all the illnesses and the way of life that it narrows down to. So it's you're definitely a testament that it all works out. I'll have 3 years soon, so.
Oh, that's great.
Yeah. So it's a pleasure listening to you. And thank you for being here.
Thank you.
Hi, I'm Wes. I'm an alcoholic.
Hey, Wes.
Yes, it has been a pleasure listening to you. Thank you. What are your favorite activities or hobbies these days?
You haven't seen me walk. Movement is very, very difficult for me and extremely painful. So there isn't a lot. And I try and make at least one meeting a day. I make the late night meetings for what some of us still refer to as 80th Street, but we've recently moved, so it's really Grant Street now. And I make that 10 o'clock at night meeting. I sponsor, I think currently there are about 8 guys. Over the years, there are hundreds of them. So if I have any activity at all, Sunday is dedicated to answering phone calls from sponsees who still call me sponsor, who live across the country now. And but that's about it. I wish I could say I have a lot of other activities, but I don't. mainly because it's so difficult for me to move. This thing folds up and I can throw it in the trunk of my car so I can get out. And as long as I'm in a seated position, I'm fairly comfortable. But as soon as I have to put weight on the nerves in my spine, it's a different story.
Hi, I'm Dee. I'm an alcoholic.
Thank you.
Thanks, Bill, for talking. I was at your speaker meeting a couple Fridays ago for your anniversary, and I've been sober a little over a year now this time. And when I came in a little over a year ago to 80th Street, Bill was the one that was there sitting in the chair, and the connection that I had with him in early sobriety was amazing. I was up there all the time, just excited to hear what he had to say, and and I still do. I treasure every night when I get to see you. You're definitely an inspiration, and I definitely owe that early sobriety at 80th Street a lot to you, and I just want to thank you. I love you.
Thank you.
My name's Richard, and I'm an alcoholic.
Richard.
Since you said that you've, over the years, it's been hundreds of people that you've ended up sponsoring, I guess what I would ask is, do you have any advice for fellow sponsors or people who have been turned to for help from people who are drinking and looking for a way to achieve sobriety?
Yeah. Actually, I do. And the biggest advice that I can give somebody who's sponsoring is share your experience with them. Don't try and teach them. I just don't lay down rules or laws or anything like that. It's strictly share experience. And when I say that, of course, there are exceptions. There are times when people are in such bad shape they don't have any idea at all what to do. So I will make suggestions, and start out reading the doctor's opinions at the beginning of the book. A lot of people skip to chapter 1, and I think they miss a lot if they don't read those IV kind of parts of the big book. But basically, what it boils down to is to remember to share the experience and not try and cram your program down their throats. Simple as that.
Thank you.
And push them to keep moving. Like I said, on today's market, putting off doing the 4th and 5th step, I think they put off doing the 4th step because they're afraid to do the 5th step. They just put it off until they get drunk again. So I would encourage them to keep moving with their program and try at the same time not to tell them what to do and how to do it.
Laura, I'm an alcoholic. To piggyback on that, you had mentioned that when your sponsor found you, that he brought you into a detox clinic there for 5 days. Would you also recommend that if a sponsor does see a person, a friend, an individual who is maybe suffering, that they maybe do something similar like that, maybe know the areas in the Kansas City area or areas around town, so that way they can maybe familiarize, maybe recommend them go to like areas in town to have them go to detox, or would you recommend that they go to an AA meeting first?
Both, I think. I would sure recommend. And again, it's so different now. When I started out, there just weren't places that you could send people. There were a handful of places across the country that you could go for some sort of rehabilitation. Like I said, I was lucky to have that 5 day. But even then, that first day when I walked in and they introduced me to one of the assistant directors, and he took one look at me and he said, "He's too young to be in here, get him out, he's got a lot of drugs left in him." That was the attitude. Like I said, I probably looked 10 years younger than I really was, but they didn't cater at all to young people in the program.
I work at KU Medical and I work in the addictions clinic, so I'm kind of familiar with a little bit. So I just wanted to see if you had more tools, so that way I could also be able to help utilize as well. If you knew more information as well, that I could help.
On where to send people?
Yeah.
I think we're lucky to, but I can't think of the name of the place in Atkinson, and there's
Valley
Hope.
Okay.
And I think that's as good as any place in the country that I've found, and probably not as expensive as a lot of them. But if they can afford it, there are great places scattered across the country. Betty Ford Hospital. There's something else in the Southwest, and I'm just not thinking of the name right now. But I think that there are good programs all across the country. Living Grid has been around for a long time. Chit Chat has been around for a long time. Anything that has survived for, 50 some years has got to be good. And there are places too that are designed for Catholics and particularly the Catholic priests. There are places in Florida, I understand there's a rehab in Florida where they cater to people who have been sober for 15 years or more and then relapse. Mm-hmm. And I had a friend who went through that. It didn't work for her, but she relapsed at 22 years and didn't make it. Her body finally got tired of putting up with all that nonsense and just shut down. I lost two friends that way, both of them women, both at 20, 21, 22 years. Neither one of them survived. So, but there are places for people like that cater to people like that. I think the one that caters to people that have 15 years or not was basically founded by Father Martin. And so they're good. He was an amazing man. When I talked about that program in Baltimore that Father Martin and I started out, and we were the same class going through that government-sponsored rehab in Baltimore. He didn't stay, he didn't finish the course because there were so many people by that time. He was becoming so well known, and they wanted him as advisor to, I think, to the United States Senate on alcohol problems. So he never finished the program in Baltimore, but we started out together anyway. I don't know whether that helps or not, but.
No, that does, thank you.
Sure.
Sabrina, alcoholic.
Yes, Sabrina.
I've been to Research Medical Center for detox.
Oh, okay.
They do depending on how bad you are, they do a 4 or 5 day detox. And they have a social worker in there that will put you into a rehab program if you're willing to do it. They don't really force you, but they force you. I mean, they kind of push you to do it, but you don't necessarily have to go. And from there, I did end up at Atchison Valley.
Yeah, that's where I was.
Yeah, and I've also been to Shawnee Mission Medical Center.
Yes, Shawnee Mission.
Yeah. Cottonwood has a good program too.
Yes.
Yeah, and they do dual diagnosis too, so if you have depression or whatever, they deal with that in your.
Shawnee Mission has the same thing, yeah.
I have a question, and we're actually running low on time. Somebody has a more important question. Go ahead.
We haven't heard yours.
I'll assure you it's not super important. I feel like this is, my people around my age and younger are suffering from kind of a depression and substance abuse issue that hasn't been seen before. I'm curious as to if that's the case for you, percentage-wise, do you think people now are suffering from, like we said the other night, diseases of despair more so than they were back then?
No, I don't think so. I think people look at it differently, but I don't know that it's any more or less than it's ever been. Sometimes I talk about the gifts that I came to the program with, and one of the gifts that I came from was the gift of desperation. So it's not always a bad thing. I really have come to the point, and Bill writes in a number of places, but we draw to ourselves exactly those things that we need for our own spiritual growth. And I buy that. I really do. And so if you make a decision to do something and it turns out to be a very painful experience, you learn from it. Don't do that again. It's kind of like sticking your hand on a hot burner. If you get burned once, you're not going to go back and do it again. I worry about my cat jumping up on the stove all the time. And I think, well, if she does it, she's gonna suffer for a while, but she won't do it twice. I think, in some ways, we're more open to talking at a group level about problems like that than we were 50 years ago. And you have to remember, too, the part of the country that I came into the program, it was all speaker meetings. There weren't groups like this. It just didn't happen. And I'm sure it was starting to happen, but it was very rare to have a discussion group. So people didn't have the opportunity that they have now. I think that's why I love that coffee shop and that 5-day rehab, because it was a chance to do things like this.
I'm Greg, I'm an alcoholic. On that point, I just heard a story today, though, about there's a very high suicide rate at this point, higher than I think ever been. and the actual life expectancy has gone down for the first time in many, many years. An opiate overdose. So I don't know if it's not a singular cause. I don't know if it's an age-related thing particularly, but there's a lot of change in this direction. There is that term despair is probably a key thing at that point.
I wasn't aware that there was actually the changes like that. I know that even for myself, I think more about suicide now than I ever have in the past. And it isn't so much as serious that I don't think I would ever do that, but the thoughts are sure there. And a lot of it has to do with the aging and the pain. And just, am I willing to live the rest of my life like this? And so I do think about, if the surgery doesn't work, do I really want to hang around after that? That's amazing for somebody like me to have those kinds of thoughts. Like I said, I don't think that I would ever follow through, but the thoughts are sure there.
Yeah.
My name is Mel, and I'm an alcoholic. And talking about depression and alcoholism, my depression, I didn't really have it before I drank. It was when I drank that really, if I started going down the rabbit hole, I went all the way down. I didn't try to kill myself, but I'd get near the bottom. But as soon as I, get the alcohol out of my system, I'd come back up to my baseline. So, I think alcohol is a depressant anyway. And so, but yeah, I suffered greatly with depression during episodes, just episodic. It wasn't the whole time. But yeah, so, like we were talking about Cottonwood, they dealt with both. They wanted to make sure my mental health was in check before, and deal with my alcoholism. And I went to Atchison, and it was a good program. I stayed 28 days. Your insurance pays for it for the most part. And they incorporate AA into that program, so you're getting both. So you go out to meetings, NA and AA, so you can kind of, you're not just in that closed group. You actually get to see people that have had 40, 50 years of sobriety, and then you see the ones that have had 1 month or 2 months. So it's a pretty good program.
All right, that's the hour.
Let me get one more comment.
Oh yeah, of course, Bill.
You talked about the changes in the program. That's something that wouldn't have happened 50 years ago either, where addicts and alcoholics were both in the same group. And when it started to change, it was okay if you had both the alcohol problem in. But now there are a lot of people who just seem to get more out of AA than they do out of NA and CA.
Yeah.
And they come in and they announce that they're addicts and they don't identify with alcoholics at all, and nobody seems to care anymore. Some of the old timers still bitch. I think you would find Clancy still has objections to that, things like that.
But
Clancy objects to so much it isn't really worth listening to him anymore.
I would like to say this is, and thank you very much, Bill.
Thank you.
Bill. We've got a couple other groups where most of us in this room kind of hang out. Right across the street at St. Andrew's Church Monday and Wednesday. There's the Free Thinkers group. We've got We Agnostics on Tuesday, Thursday, Friday, Saturday, Sunday. All different places. There's cards with more information if you'd like addresses and stuff there. And thank you. That's all.